Welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Marcus Carlson. The British election wasn't the nail-biter many had expected. The Conservative Party won its own majority in the House of Commons, which means they'll be able to govern on their own. But while the Tory victory ended one factor of uncertainty for British businesses, it opened the door to another. Prime Minister David Cameron has pledged to renegotiate Britain's membership of the European Union, and he's also pledged to put Britain's EU membership to a referendum by 2017. It's seen to increase the prospect of a British exit from the EU, which in turn would redraw the economic map in the UK and Europe. Today, we'll be looking at what's ahead for Britain's EU membership together with Lucy Thomas. She's campaign director for Business for New Europe, a group that brings together business leaders in favour of Britain being part of the EU. Welcome, Lucy. It's great to have you here.
Thanks.
Now, let's cut to the chase. What's the likelihood in your mind of a Brexit, a British exit from the EU?
Well, I think if you look at the polls consistently over the last 2 years, you've seen an increase in public support for remaining in. So the latest poll has about a 10-point lead for remaining in, about 45% to 35%. That obviously then leaves around 20% who are still undecided. And that's the key question. What will happen to those as the time goes on?
OK, and it'll be your job to win them over, so to speak, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Along with lots of other people. I mean, the point is the real passionate case for Britain's EU membership hasn't really been made consistently over the last 20, 30 years. And I think we take a lot of the rights and the benefits for granted. Meanwhile, those who'd like us to get out have been consistently knocking Brussels and saying, oh, look, there's another daft piece of regulation. So I think we have a real job to do, both from the business community, but also politicians and also popular figures and all kinds of people to explain the benefits to people in their everyday lives.
Now, since the UK election, the government has kind of hinted at the possibility of holding the referendum before 2017. Is that a possibility in your mind?
Yes, absolutely. I think if you look at the timetable, the Queen's speech will go through at the end of this month, and then you'll get the legislation through fairly quickly after that, given that there's a Conservative majority. Were there to have been some sort of coalition, it would have perhaps been harder, but I think it will certainly get through the Commons, and then it has to get through the House of Lords, where some amendments may be put, but that will get through. And if you think about the timetable in terms of reform, you have the European Council at the end of June, where David Cameron may be asked by other EU leaders to set out the principles of what he's looking for in terms of reform. That can maybe be done towards the end of this year, and you could certainly see a referendum either sort of summer 2016 or towards the end of 2016. And from the business community's perspective, actually curtailing that period of uncertainty is maybe the better thing to do, rather than having 2 years of wrangling and uncertainty about the future. Actually, let's just get it done quickly.
Now, I want to drill down on something that you mentioned there. As David Cameron says that he's looking to renegotiate Britain's relationship with the European Union, I just want to play a clip from Finance Minister George Osborne, or the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as he's known in the UK. He arrived at a meeting in Brussels this week. Let's listen in to what he had to say about the membership issue.
We come here with a very clear mandate to improve Britain's relationship with the rest of the EU and to reform the EU so that it creates jobs and increases living standards for all its citizens. I don't think anyone's now in any doubt we will hold that referendum on British membership of the European Union. Having conducted these negotiations, we go into the negotiations aiming to be constructive and engaged, but also resolute and firm, and no one should underestimate our determination to succeed for the working people of Britain, indeed the working people of the whole of the European Union.
OK, Lucy, we heard that George Osborne said that the British government would be resolute and firm in its negotiations with other EU countries. What exactly, though, in your mind, does the Conservative Party and the British government want renegotiated, so to speak?
Well, that's the question that everybody's been asking. And I think the Prime Minister has been deliberately vague in terms of what they're looking for, so that there isn't a finite shopping list of things that absolutely must be achieved. But I think it falls into four broad categories. I think you've got the completing of the single market, so extending that in terms of services and transport and digital and energy, something that actually I think all member states can get behind. You know, this is positive for jobs and growth and businesses and consumers. So I think that's probably an easier one. And then you've got things about furthering free trade agreements and making sure that Europe's trading with the rest of the world too, you know, and completing TTIP as soon as possible, the EU-US free trade agreement, for example. And then it starts to get perhaps a bit trickier. Things around sort of national parliaments and national governments and how much of a say they have over EU rules, because I think there's a bit of a sense that there's a democratic deficit, and so you need national parliaments to be able to perhaps work together to block certain rules, perhaps beefing up the yellow card, which allows a third of the national parliaments in the EU to stop a regulation going ahead, perhaps something stronger, more like a red card. But again, that has some agreement across the EU, but it has to be on the right terms. And then I think there are things around migrant benefits, and that's something which certainly Eastern European countries haven't really liked the mood music coming out around that, because they think, rightly, EU migrants come to the UK, they pay tax and they work here, and there's a tiny proportion who are claiming benefits. So actually it's slightly sort of trying to deviate from the UKIP position, which says so long as you're in the EU, you can't control your borders, and as many EU migrants as possible can come here. So I think the government are looking for something which can say, no, we can actually be tough on migration from the EU, and the way we're going to do it is by cracking down on benefits. So I think there's a lot that can be done in domestic law and changing our rules rather than getting the whole of the EU to have to agree to it. And then lastly, there's the phrase ever closer union, which the Prime Minister doesn't want to apply to the UK anymore. So what can they perhaps get some kind of deal around some wording saying it no longer applies to every member state in the same way?
Do you think that business leaders in the UK will get behind that laundry list, so to speak? What do you, for instance, in Business for New Europe, want renegotiated? What needs to change, in your opinion?
I think we hear a lot that smaller businesses really feel the weight of regulation. And I think it's true that it's easier for bigger companies to adapt when new rules come in. You know, they have armies of lawyers and accountants and people in Brussels who are on top of all of this stuff. So if you're a tiny business and there are new rules, it's harder for you to comply. But that said, in order to remain in the single market, you're always going to have one set of rules on certain things. So I think the key will be, when EU decisions are taken, making sure that a full impact assessment is done to make sure that smaller businesses aren't being adversely affected, and perhaps having some exemptions for smaller businesses from certain things.
Do you think that other EU leaders are likely to bite, though, as David Cameron says that he wants Britain's treaty with the EU renegotiated? We've heard from the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, saying that other EU governments probably would not be interested in a treaty change because the last few treaty changes have been quite painful. They've taken a lot of time. So, as I say, do you think that other European leaders are really interested in what Britain has to say, so to speak?
Well, I think that's the key thing. I mean, treaty change is not going to happen by 2017 or indeed 2016, when it's more likely the referendum's happening. So I think it's curious that David Cameron has been so insistent on the need for treaty change to get what he wants through, because actually, looking at his shopping list, you don't need to change the treaty.
If Britain were to vote for leaving the EU, would it really be such a disaster? At the end of the day, nobody wants economic disarray, and there will probably be some sort of free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. So, as I say, at the end of the day, doesn't matter.
Absolutely. I think in the short term, there would be chaos because we'd have to renegotiate all of the free trade agreements with the rest of the world. So the EU currently has free trade deals with over 50 countries, and the UK would suddenly no longer benefit from those. So right there's an impact on those who are trading with the rest of the world.
But you say that there would be chaos, but wouldn't this be a sort of a lengthy process that would be thought through beforehand? One could assume that, no?
Well, there would be a 2-year-long negotiation process during which some kind of deal is struck. But the point is there's no guarantee about what that's going to look like at the end. So if you're a business, say, for example, a manufacturer, you're thinking about whether you put a car plant in the UK. You don't actually know whether there are going to be tariffs on all of your cars of up to 10%. 50% of cars made in the UK go to the EU. So if you're a car manufacturer, you're not going to stay here. And that's the uncertainty, which is the real problem. And it already exists, given that the question is in the air. So in the run-up to the Scottish referendum, there was a 17 billion drop in investment into the whole of the UK. And so if you think about the scale of Brexit, that will be much larger. And it's already happening. We already know that people are freezing investment decisions. So I think that the implications for manufacturers, exporters, and the whole of the supply chain too. I mean, they say that several million jobs are linked to Britain's EU exports, and you're right that they wouldn't disappear overnight, you know, and we would certainly be able to trade. But the question is, what will that deal look like? And if we ended up something, I would guess we'd get something like Norway or Switzerland. So Norway have to pay 80% per head into the EU budget, what the UK does, in order to access a single market. And Norway also has to apply 75% of the rules. So basically, you're in a situation where you still have to comply with the rules, but you're not even at the table when they're being negotiated.
Now, as you said earlier in this interview, there's a large part of people who are undecideds. How difficult, how tough do you think this fight will be? Very briefly for us.
I think we have to make the case in a much more positive way, and we have to make people really understand how it benefits them and their families in the immediate term. I think talking about the economy and big, wide arguments, while they're beneficial to the business community, I think people themselves have to understand what the benefits are.
All right, Lucy Thomas from Business for New Europe. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us here at France 24. With that, we're going to be wrapping up the business interview. Thanks for watching.